Afternoon and welcome to the November 18, 2020 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using in response to Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives order. This format enables the City Council to meet and take care of business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. The second item on today's agenda is an executive session held pursuant to ORS 192.662E. When the first item concludes, this broadcast will end and further access will be limited to only those authorized to attend. So thank you all again for joining us. And with that, I don't know if I'm turning this over to City Manager or directly to you, Judge Gill. I think I'm turning it directly to you, Judge. So welcome, Judge Gill.
All right. Hey, thank you very much for having me. It's been a long time since I've seen a lot of you folks directly. Councilor Semple, I think I saw you out in the park blocks a little while back, but other than that, it's been a long time. And thanks for having me. One of the things that Council expressed an interest in, and I think it was a mutual interest, was making sure that the lines of communication to the municipal court remained open from Council to me or to the job of the presiding judge, just to make sure that there's a check-in. I think when I was talking with Councilor Taylor last year and talking about what we all might want to expect and do moving forward, I don't think anybody imagined that there may be so much to talk about the next time that I would be here. And so I appreciate you having me here. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's not my intent to go through a list detail by detail of everything that's gone on with the court since the middle of March to say exactly what's happened, what we've done, what we've been through, and where we're going. I do really appreciate any specific questions if you all want to email me after this, or I can appear again to address other individual things that you all, or questions you all may have here. My intent is not to take up the entire time with all those minor details. I think it's fitting, though, that my appearance here today is really on the first day of the governor's freeze order, because that, of course, has thrown the court into not chaos, but something that resembles a little bit of chaos, to try to make sure that we continue what our mission is here and our responsibility to the community and to the city, but doing it under these mandates, these guidelines, and really, to be frank, the overwhelming anxiety that attaches to all of the stuff that's going on right now. So this morning, of course, was rife with trying new things, trying to fit dockets in new ways. Of course, like everybody else, we're trying to do as much virtually as possible, which has presented very unique challenges for our court, not insurmountable challenges, and a lot of those challenges actually have allowed us to grow. But it hasn't been easy whatsoever. So I sent out a couple of emails in early March, or mid-March and late March, about all the things that the court was doing in order to respond to the governor's orders, the CDC guidelines, and other mandates that we had in order to keep functioning. And I'm not going to go over those specific items, but I'll tell you that it really hasn't changed much since then. There was a long period where we were able to sort of get into a rhythm of who is appearing in custody, who is appearing out of custody, and who is appearing virtually on some of our virtual dockets that we were able to create. But like with anything else, this pandemic keeps changing, the landscape keeps changing, and so the court keeps changing or trying to change with it. And with it, garnering all the perspectives of all the folks who are involved, City Prosecutor's Office, Eugene Police Department, our defense bar, court staff, court administration, the different judges who are involved, the Lane County Jail, and the folks in the Springfield Jail, all of our partners. And I think that it is, without fail, there is going to be two or more perspectives on what ought to happen and what the capabilities are. And so I would tell you that we have had robust conversations throughout the last 8 months about where the court is and where it needs to go in order to fulfill our mission. General overview of the court is that we had to close our doors when it was ordered that the court stay closed. As soon as we were able to open the doors again, adhering to the guidelines, we let those folks in that could be here. It was very structured, very few folks. But what we really started to focus on was trying to create a virtual docket. And fast forward from then to now, let's say late March, mid-April to now, we now have an established virtual docket that folks can appear on. Either if it's a criminal matter, they can ask to appear at arraignment. So they appear in custody, or either in custody or out of custody, asked to appear on the virtual docket. And as long as they have the ability to appear on the docket, email address to get the Zoom information, and the ability to have access to Wi-Fi, they can appear virtually. Our court-appointed attorneys in the city prosecutor's office have made great use of that. And I think that they are expanding their wings and learning how to take full advantage of that docket. And my hope and expectation is that they will continue to fill those virtual slots. As you can imagine, our backlog has been a point of my concern and our concern, everybody's concern, ever since the doors closed to the courthouse. And I have met with our court administrator almost every single work day since the court closure to make sure that we are doing everything possible to keep our doors, whether they're virtual or otherwise, open, and we keep that bar, that access to justice, as low as possible so we can keep as many folks coming through as we can. The jail has been a very interesting story. I want to carve that out from the rest of the operations for a moment. When the court first closed, of course, people were still being taken into custody. Folks were still being arrested on either new crimes or warrants or other reasons that folks are taken into custody. And of course, they're in the jail. And that's when constitutional statutory rights attach immediately. And so that's something that the court absolutely has to focus on, can never drop the ball on that. And so we were appearing at the Lane County Jail regularly every day, and also having our Springfield transports, those folks that are in custody at Springfield and being transported over to the courthouse, those continued. But the jail operations started to change, and it was very apparent that we were going to have to shift our model. So we started to appear as a court at the Lane County Jail telephonically. The reason that we did that was, number one, movement of inmates at the jail was very precarious back when everybody was still learning about what this was going to entail, this pandemic. Patrick Ludke at the jail giving advice to those folks down at the Lane County Jail, how that was going to incorporate with the circuit court matters, as well as the Eugene Municipal Court matters. And it became apparent that folks weren't going to be able to be moved around the jail like they were before. And so when I would go, when court staff would go and other judges to the jail, we would appear in the makeshift courtroom up there, see the folks that could be transported upstairs and keep safe distances, etc. But we were also traveling more. We used to go down to the segregation and medical area every once in a while. It became the practice where we were going down to the seg med area almost every day, and down to the intake area of the jail and what they call the fishbowl, or the book-in area. And that's because they were housing folks that were in intake that were being observed, either because they displayed symptoms, because they had to be quarantined for a little while, because they were simply just under observation, or they, for some other reason, weren't able to be transported up to the courtroom. So we were traveling around the jail and up to 4 different locations. And of course, with every new place you go to a jail, the exposure increases exponentially. So we started doing this telephonically from the court. I will tell you that I had real reservations personally about doing that. I'm a very in-person kind of judge. That's my perspective. I think we ought to meet the defendant where the defendant at, and if they can't be transported from the jail, that's where we ought to be. Cooler heads prevailed in that one. just because it became overwhelming that, look, this is not going to be a good idea. So we didn't do it. And we stopped going to the jail and we did everything telephonically. That means that there was a telephone in the makeshift courtroom at the jail. There was a bailiff that was carrying a phone around the jail, and we would communicate with our inmates that way. It was the very sort of base of what I think was going to be acceptable. And we oriented ourselves and focused on being able to have virtual appearances at the jail, which is where we are now. The folks that are in custody at the Lane County Jail appear virtually, and this is the same that's being done with the circuit court. They appear virtually. They can see me. They can see the courtroom. They've already talked with their attorney telephonically, and so they're fully informed on everything that's going on. And it's actually quite an efficient process, or it's become efficient thus far. And we've been able to actually continue that court business, being able to make sure that we meet those constitutional and statutory requirements that way. And that's allowed our court to continue to function and allowed folks to have their cases heard and attorneys having contact with their clients. And that's where we are now with jail. That really paved the way to other things that we're able to or trying to be able to do with the court. I'm going to fast forward to today. Given the freeze, the idea was to have the folks who were supposed to be arraigned today appear virtually as well. I don't know how many of you know this, but at the municipal courthouse, those of you that have been down here to tour it, we are now also located on the first floor, or most of the first floor. And so we're trying to utilize that space as much as possible for, in this case, arraignments and other appearances. We're just trying to be as flexible as we can, seeing how much we can exercise our virtual wings. Other than that, the actual dockets at the courthouse keep changing, and there's no other way to keep them from changing. It's all dependent on the number of folks that are allowed in the courthouse at any one time, what the current guidelines are, what the needs are, whether there's a trial set or not set, what space we need to provide for certain kinds of dockets. And I don't see the challenges going away anytime soon. I will tell you that the Eugene Municipal Court staff and the supervisors, the administration, have been absolutely amazing. They have, they've stayed up late. They've worked weekends. Those folks that could, they have worked with the changing dockets. Dockets have been rescheduled at a minimum of 5 times since this thing hit, when everybody thought that we were going to be setting these things out 2 weeks and then maybe a month, and then set into the middle of the summer, and then deciding, well, we're really just realistically not going to be able to do a trial before November. That's when everything is going to be predictable, and we'll be able to start bringing jurors back in then, to right now, which is trending exactly the opposite direction. So court staff is, in one of my last emails back in March, I was describing how much work they were doing. And I will tell you, that pace has not stopped for these folks. They are bending over backwards. They are all dealing with the real life issues that all of us are, whether it's kids, spouses, illness, financial, all those things boil into what they're doing, yet they have to do an incredible amount of lifting while they're here at the courthouse. I'm still the new guy to the city. I've been here at the municipal court for a while in different roles. So I don't know exactly the functions and what the insides and outsides of all of the other parts of the city are. But what I can tell you is that what I've seen here over the last 8 months has been absolutely incredible. Administration has made sure that everybody stayed safe. The numbers are strictly adhered to. You can talk to our attorneys who have had to deal with some of those number walls every now and then, and including members of the public. But at no time was anybody unsafe. Social distancing strictly enforced. There are a lot of symbols around the courthouse about what's required and not required to make sure that in this environment that has a pretty, I would say, a high exposure to the public. I think it was rated as medium risk when Safety Paul, who's been named to me as Safety Paul, has come through and looked at our area. But we have a lot of folks that come through here every day. Some folks that have been released from the jail, general public, people who are simply trying to take care of violations, those kinds of things. And so we have to make sure our practices are extraordinarily strict. And the administration here, Cheryl Stone, the court administrator, has done a fantastic job of making sure that all of those guidelines have been met and continue to be met. And of course, there's friction every once in a while and frustration as this COVID fatigue and wildfire fatigue and all the other fatigues that you can fit in there start to weigh in. But at no time has anybody, I think, been put in an absolutely unsafe situation. And that's a really big deal in having to deal with all of these things. And so my hat's off to the administration and to the staff that work here. And then that's also to say the attorneys, both the city prosecutor's office and the defense attorneys, have been dealing with these unfamiliar landscapes and been put in uncomfortable positions in order to try to get dockets met. And that means learning how to do things virtually. That means working with the court to reschedule or to have things done virtually. Frustrations when the court's requiring a motion and not requiring a motion for certain kinds of appearances, and just to make sure that everything is done in a way that when we look back a year from now, we can say, yes, it's been done the right way. We did not let anything fall through the cracks that we could prevent, or at least we're able to evolve as we move forward and take the lessons that we learn so we don't repeat these things. It's been a time of growing, I think, for all of the attorneys involved, for the judges that are involved, for me, for sure, and for court staff. And I think that even though sometimes relationships have been strained just because of the environment that we're in, ultimately the relationships have become stronger. I have had a chance to really dig in and to understand, I think, start to know the jail docket. My relationship with the jail, I think, has been somewhat fortified by the fact that we're all in this together, and we want to all make sure that the right thing happens. Not everybody's in agreement all the time, and sometimes you got to call somebody just like they call on you. But that's part, I think, of a good relationship. So that's the jail part. That's the court part. In terms of general court, we've had specific challenges with our community court. Of course, that was shuttered for a good long while before we could actually start to think about where to even begin to open something like that up and be somewhat effective and be able to address open up in the way that the community court is supposed to function, or at least try to hit the marks with why we're there. The court hired a new case manager. She was formerly with Whitebird. Her name is Brenda Kosadar. And I will tell you, she came on a little bit later in the game as we were trying to figure things out. And her first day, she was, or maybe the second day, she was out on the streets of Eugene, going to the places that she knows about, having a very good relationship with a lot of those folks who are indigent and unhoused, trying to find these folks in person to let them know that, hey, the court is now back open. The doors are now back open. The court is trying to reestablish what resources these community providers have and try to hook them up with these providers and try to basically pull people out of their shelter in place where it might be super difficult. Yes, it's in the vein because they have criminal court cases pending, but that mission of the community court has never gone away. And the community court staff, the supervisor, Sarah Caligari, and of course, Cheryl Stone and all the staff that are involved have continued to make sure that that mission and the purpose of that mission is not lost. So I was really impressed with the way that the community court folks really started to open up and try to embrace getting that started. And it's still an imperfect system, and it's still very limited in terms of the resources that folks can access on a regular basis, but they're out there, and we continue to try to uncover it as that part of our criminal justice system, just because that's really, it's the right thing to do. Our mental health court is starting to grow, notwithstanding the COVID and the other considerations of court closures. We are working with Laurel Hill and some of the other community providers to try to make sure that we can identify folks who really ought to be going on a different alternative track. And that has been going really well. Judge Fredericks has taken the helm there. and nothing can happen overnight, but he and the supervisor there, again, Sarah Caligari, who does our specialty dockets, have done a really good job of putting their heads together, making sure that program starts to grow, and it grows in the right way, very tethered, substantial, and nothing's done on a whim. So it can handle something like a COVID pandemic and still come out on the other side functioning and giving these folks the attention that they need in order to stay out of the criminal justice system. Same thing with our problem-solving docket. These things have been all over the place. You know, someone gets arrested, taken into jail, and released. It's anybody's guess as to whether they're actually going to appear, simply because of that anxiety that I talked about earlier, in addition to all of those other factors that we normally deal with. And so I really got to give my hats off to these folks that every week, every day, every month come in and continue the mission of their specialty dockets. That allows me to focus on other things like making sure that the folks who are in custody stay in custody, the folks that should be released are released, and they've got everything that they need in order to make sure that their case is processed, that we're working with the city prosecutor's office and defense counsel as much as possible to have these things continue to move forward as it's appropriate. There was, and I'm also going to say right now, there are probably 1,000 things that I'm forgetting. And having done this for the last 8 months in this COVID situation, I go from being high level, trying to figure out, on a court-wide basis, what ought to happen, what should happen, going down to the specific case file that's in front of me, and then working with these different programs as they move forward and all the special problems that we've seen moving on. So I would love to go up and down and up and down and up and down with you all, but I know that this is not the place and this is not the time. Again, I want to say, reach out to me with any questions that you may have. Community court, one other thing that I forgot, we actually, when we were reopening and trying to connect folks to providers, we actually went out to the park blocks on a Wednesday, which was not a community court day, but just to open up, we invited all the providers who couldn't appear or couldn't be with us because of the capacity limitations for the courthouse. And they were all in the park blocks with us. We had the majority of our providers that were normally there during the community court out in the open on the park blocks and inviting people to, hey, look, you can connect with these resources. Here they are. And of course, I would have liked to have had a lot more folks there. We make the announcements that we can make. People will hear it if they can hear it. But we actually had a lot of folks come through, make connection with service providers. And we had a prosecutor on site and a defense attorney on site, and we actually were able to get a couple cases back on track that were not even community court cases, things that had been out in the wind and brought right back on. If we had been able to do that early on in the summer, I think that we could have made some real hay with our outdoor appearances and maybe even swayed some other dockets to do something similar. But we're learning as we go. I also want to make sure that I don't forget the Eugene Police Department has been very good to work with. The folks, our contacts there, the court team, those folks that work with community court, but then the officers that work with us on a daily basis with our changing dockets and schedules have been really good. We've all been frustrated by certain things, but I just want to say that they have, I think, really been crucial for the court to be able to move forward as well as the defense bar and the city prosecutor's office. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. I've worked with a couple of the execs, here and there moving forward, addressing different concerns for different things, not a ton, but I appreciated working with them and tackling some of the different issues that we've faced as a municipal court and that I faced as a presiding judge. And that's been wonderful as well. My goal as the presiding judge here is to make sure that we can flesh out our virtual docket. I know the Community Safety Initiative, a lot of attention was put on trying to address the shortfalls that we have personnel-wise and try to get that third courtroom up and running to make sure that we can address the massive amount of cases that we have coming through. And obviously everything's been put on a different track, so to speak, and our considerations have changed remarkably. But what's evolved, in my opinion, is our virtual courtroom and being able to do things virtually and other remote kinds of appearances like violation trials by affidavit, virtual trials that are violations. That our third courtroom, we've actually just sort of tried to makeshift one virtually. I count that as the beginning of our third courtroom. So if and when, let's just say sometime, hopefully in the near future, not this year, we can get that physical third courtroom open here. Our virtual processes, in my opinion, have opened the door even more. We're going to be able to get a lot more done should we have all the resources that we need to be able to really process the large amount of business that the court does. And so that is going to be one of the huge silver linings walking out of this thing, is what remotely. And so we can move their business forward without having them to make hard choices. I've found that those people who are otherwise employed and can't take work off because their work is so vital to their stability and survival right now, they can make things work. So where it's appropriate, we have found this avenue to access to justice that has been amazing. And I'm not sure that I realized at the beginning, no, let me rephrase that. I did not realize how effective that could be before. And now, having been exposed to that, I'm not sure that this court could ever change course on having that as one of our courtrooms whatsoever. Let's see. I'm sure there's 1,000 things, like I said, that I am not telling you. That was a lot of information from you. Some of it was very general, but I wish I could go day by day and let you know exactly everything that's happened here. My overall statement would be that as stressed as the court is, as stressed as our partners are, as anxious as everybody is in this system, the mission of the court remains. And if we can do it safely and appropriately, we're going to be able to keep the business moving forward for all the right reasons, for constitutional reasons, statutory reasons, etc. And even if we were to go into a full-on closure again, let's say the governor were to shut everything down, or the city were to decide we're not going to have the doors open, we are now in a position to where the court can continue to function in a way that there's no way that it was back in March and back in April. That's our jails, both in custody at Lane County and Springfield, as well as our virtual docket and things that are being done by written word and other ways of communicating with the court. One of the analogies that I've used is, and it's appropriate for the term the freeze. You know, you have your pipes, your water pipes at your house, and during these really deep winters, if you've ever been through a really cold, long freeze, you worry about your pipes freezing. And the old trick is to keep some of the water running in your house overnight, so it's always moving and it doesn't freeze. And that's kind of what we're doing here. In fact, that's exactly what we're doing here. We're keeping as much water running as we possibly can. That's reasonable and that's appropriate to make sure that we try to prevent any more of a backlog than was already created by the onset of the pandemic, and to make sure that we do it the right way moving forward. So I'm not addressing maybe some of the concerns or questions that you all had. That took 29 minutes for me to get out. Hopefully it all made sense. And for those parts that didn't make sense, please excuse me. And please reach out. I'd be happy to do a Zoom session or a team session or a GoToMeeting session, or all the sessions that you and I now know how to do, multiple sessions at a time. And we can chat further. Email's great. Or I can be back here and appear in front of you all again.
Thank you so much, Judge. That was absolutely compelling and inspiring. So really, I feel both informed and very excited about the way you've responded to this. And it was really, really a great presentation. And I do have a lineup of counselors who have questions or comments. So we're going to work through that. Mike, then Claire, then Alan.
Thank you, Barrett. Thank you, Judge, for the report. Appreciate it very much. A big thank you to you, to your staff, the administration, to all the partners that you mentioned for working so hard to administer justice in the difficult conditions. That's admirable and great job. To drill down a little bit more on some of the things you said, I had some more specific questions with regard to your docket specifically. If you looked at the last 8 months and compared them to the 8 months of the previous year, would you say that the number of cases that you're actually administering are decreasing or increasing?
So the question is the same number of cases filed for the 8 months prior to the closure, the same as the number of cases filed after?
March through November of last year to March through November of this year, is it roughly the same? Are you getting through more cases or fewer cases, or pretty much the same?
Man, that's a great question. And that's a multifaceted question. That's nice work being able to work 4 or 5 questions into just a couple of words.
Thanks, I do my best, yeah.
And the simple answer is I don't know. I can tell you anecdotally that it feels like more. It's probably less, just because we've had to do things differently. I know during the outset of the pandemic, different agencies started doing things a little bit differently in order to respond to the crisis. And how that affects the numbers, I can't tell you off the top of my head. However, I work with very smart people that I think keep tabs on a lot of these things. Yeah. And so if you want to either email me or I can email you,
that would be
or the city council altogether, what numbers and comparisons you would like to see. I can see if I can get those numbers to you and then have a discussion to provide context to those numbers if that's acceptable.
Yeah, I'd love to have a note with that. And I have 2 other questions here, so we may spawn a few other things that can be responded to later, but hopefully perhaps you can do these in a more general fashion. They're not as number intensive. But again, with your docket, you mentioned the backlog. Would you say that the backlog of your docket is, I would assume it's increasing under the circumstances. By how much is my question? For example, the relative term would be people generally before COVID waited X amount of time before a hearing of some nature. And now with COVID and virtual hearings, as they stack up, people wait now, Y amount of time. How would you define the difference in backlog as it relates to time?
That's a great question too. And again, this will be anecdotal, my observation from the bench and what my general feeling is. And I'm going to put the asterisk next to that.
Sure.
There have been a lot of times where I've had a feeling and then I've had a chance to review the data.
Don't worry, this isn't testimony.
And it's something
conversation, man. It's all good.
Well, so let me just give you an overview of kind of how it works. It's not going to answer the question directly, but when our doors closed, even before our doors closed, we started to reschedule our appearances. We have everything from a parking infraction all the way up to a jury trial for someone who's in custody for the charge of assault or mess, and those kinds of Class A person misdemeanors. And we started having to reschedule a lot of those things that didn't have timelines attached to them. And then when we had to close down fully, our first batch of total reschedules were all of our criminal appearances as well as non-criminal appearances. And then as we slowly started to open back up and having to started to explore what we could do virtually, we set all of our trials knowing that we wouldn't be able to do them into this month, into November, knowing that there was no way that we could actually have a jury trial before November. Just practically and logistically wasn't going to be able to happen unless somebody was in custody and they had a right to do it right away, which almost happened a couple of times, but those cases ended up resolving. I will tell you that the staff had to reschedule appearances at least 5 times. And while those cases were being rescheduled because of the lack of docket space, because our doors were either closed or we were open on a very limited basis, given the number of folks that could actually be in the courthouse at any given time. Mm-hmm. law enforcement did not stop arresting people nor
Right.
citing people.
Well,
I can't tell you if those numbers went up or down, but you're looking at both of those things. Before this started, I was able to set an out of custody criminal appearance for someone to appear with their attorney. I would say probably about 3 weeks out, maybe a month. If there's anybody listening from the city prosecutor's office or from my court staff or the defense, they're either nodding their head in agreement or they're waiting to tongue lash me when I'm done with this, saying I'm absolutely wrong. But that's my general feeling. And we were able to set trials out 6 weeks, maybe, depending on what the requirements for the city prosecutor's office in terms of subpoenas, victim notification, and other things like that. And so we were able to be moving at a pretty decent clip. And if you all remember, we were maybe you don't remember, but we were all really working collaboratively with the city prosecutor's office and the defense bar to try to get that third courtroom up and running, to try to increase the number of folks that we could see at any one time in our courthouse, and try to get concurrent dockets like trials and what we call TSRs, those criminal appearances, things having to do with violations, have all three of the courtrooms that we have here at the building humming, right? Keeping no courtroom dark. Now, I am scheduling trials out into late March, and our TSRs are continually setting further and further out, depending on who the attorneys are. Our dockets are being set out into January for their first criminal non-custody appearance.
Is there any
limited
constitutional issues with that time frame growing?
They are, well, they have been growing for a little while. They haven't been growing exponentially, in my opinion. But I don't think that there is any one dynamic that, or one variable that affects whether those dockets increase or decrease. A lot of times, a lot of these cases end up resolving because folks are able to have contact with their attorneys through the means that we've put together. And the city prosecutor's office is able to work with defense counsel. We are going to, in the middle of December, add an additional Springfield Transport. So the folks that we have in custody at Springfield are able to be transported twice a week to the courthouse, as opposed to the one that we have existing now. We have 5 in custody appearances with the city prosecutor available all 5 days for our Lane County. That's the same, but we're really learning how to effectively utilize those appearances in addition to other custody matters, as well as utilize our out of custody appearances and the virtual docket. So before, we were doing pretty well, but now that we've been stripped of the luxury of peacetime, we're really digging in and finding out what we're able to do, what our mettle is. And if restrictions were to be lifted at one point, given the lessons that we've learned and what we've dug into, I don't think that means that we can't continue to be even more efficient than we were and have cases heard in any less amount of time.
My question is really about some potential future, drop-off point at a certain point of amount of time people have to wait before being able to appear for a charge of some nature, especially criminal. Do we run into constitutional issues with that length of time and not being speedy right to justice?
Sure. I will tell you, and again, another great question. Keep throwing them. You're going to have a good ball game here in a minute. The absolute number one focus of mine, other than the safety of folks that are involved in the court, is the constitutional rights of the people who are cited or have a criminal allegation against them. Fast and speedy trial rights are of utmost importance, and we want to try to avoid all delays possible. There's good cause found in some instances. The Chief Justice orders that come down that affect circuit courts and the appellate courts, I've taken a lot of direction from those, and a lot of the other things don't apply to municipal courts, and so I make a different decision on what happens with any particular dockets.
As a
I don't have
gentleman,
any concerns about fast and speedy, what we're doing.
As a jump
I don't
in
have any concerns
there,
whatsoever.
I have had conversations with folks involved in circuit court and about their processes. Have you learned a lot of tricks perhaps from that, from what they're doing?
Well, gosh, I wish I had someone from the circuit court here so we could banter back and forth. I have a good relationship with a lot of the judges at the circuit court, and it's just from knowing them for a while. And a lot of the attorneys that appear in and out there, and a lot of the attorneys that appear here also appear in circuit court. And we have to do things our way at the municipal court because it's apples and oranges. Some things apply, right? Rules of evidence apply in both courts. Statutes, fast and speedy, constitutional rights, they apply in both courts. But the resources of the circuit court far outweigh what we have here in the circuit court, or I mean in the municipal court. So we have to be able to do things our own way and make sure that we do it the right way. And that means changing some of our processes, and that means ramping up some of the other processes. So in terms of learning tricks from them, I will say that they were already set up to do in custody virtual appearances from Lane County. Before this all started, it was a latent resource that they had that came to the forefront when this happened. And so our focus was then to try to make sure that we were able to get our virtual ability to do things virtually from the jail up as soon as possible, and learning from what they do there. They do other things in the jail that are a little bit differently, but most of what we do is similar that applies to us.
Constitutional question?
Please.
Do we run into a problem with the constitutional rights of somebody at some point if we're out too far with the docket?
Yes, but that's also on a case-by-case basis, and I don't have any of those yet.
Okay, lastly, are we still doing pretrial holds? If so, are there less of them, more of them, none at all? If not, why not, sort of thing?
Well, Councilor Clark, the number of holds that we have, yes, we are still doing pretrial holds. The number of people that are actually being held pretrial, I could give you a comparison of numbers, but I don't think that's going to tell you much. What I will tell you is that the Lane County Jail, which had what they call a Fed cap, a federal cap, which any number of persons that they're allowed to have in the jail at any one point, and they have to report this on a daily basis, and I think maybe even 2 times a day. And it was just a little under 400 before all this started. When all this started and went forward, that Fed cap dropped down to 250. And the number, and so there are a lot of folks being released. I was really concerned about this. The jail had made some concessions to us in the past for folks that were being held. Those concessions necessarily had to go away. But concurrent with that was the ability for me to start drilling into and get a deeper understanding of what happens with what we call the Eugene silo. Those are the folks that are held at Lane County in the on the beds that we lease from the county, and also to take a really good look at the Springfield beds and be able to allocate those folks in our court that have been sentenced appropriately, and those folks that should be held pre-trial appropriately. And there have been some instances where some people have been released that I didn't think they should be released. But again, our relationship with the jail, the court's relationship with the jail, and with the Eugene Police Department on what ought to happen with somebody who was taken into custody, taken to the Lane County Jail or to the Springfield Jail for that matter, and being held on a certain priority as ordered by the court has really come into a much sharper focus. And so I don't have an overwhelming sense that the jails are releasing folks that I wouldn't want to have held, that or another judge has determined that they needed to be held. So I think the percentage of folks that are being held pre-trial hasn't, again, I might get a tongue lashing for this, but I don't feel that it has changed significantly enough for me to be concerned by it in anything additional to what we were concerned by before.
Well, let me just say that if at some point in the future you are, I believe it's appropriate for council to interact with other members of other government bodies too, to be of help if we can. Let's say that.
Sir, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I have two counselors in the queue. It looks like Alan has dropped off, Claire and Emily, and I just want to, you've given such robust answers that we are moving through our allotted time for this. So I'm just going to encourage counselors to be brief, and Judge, I'm hoping if you have elaborate responses that some of this can be followed up afterwards. So
Yes, ma'am.
I will turn to Claire and then to Emily.
Mayor, I'm here. I just keep getting dropped off and back on. I'm not sure why.
Thanks, Mayor. I just have very brief comments, and I don't think they need a response. I'm just, very impressed with the work, with your work, Judge Gill, and the work of your staff, and really want to say thank you and appreciate the heroic efforts you all have been making to keep people safe and still do the adjudications that are required by the court. And I was very pleased to hear you frame the efforts to stand up a third courtroom and as an accomplishment, and that you've discovered a role for a virtual court going forward, even after we come out of this pandemic, as a way to create a more accessible way for some members of our community to appear before the court. I think that is a really valuable discovery, and I appreciate you indicating that you think that will continue to be part of how you operate going into the future. So I just wanted to call that out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Okay, I have Emily and then Alan pop back in.
Thank you. Thank you for this report. I'm a little confused about the virtual appearances. What if someone doesn't have access to the internet?
That's a great question. And that is, that has been fuel for a lot of conversations. And so unless the court doors have been absolutely closed for safety reasons, right? It's a mandate from the city or from the governor or some other reason. Those folks will always be able to appear in some fashion in person. If they don't have the ability to appear virtually, and that's all we have at the moment, then there's nothing, and they're out of custody, right? Then that's just something that we're going to have to deal with moving forward, but they're not going to be penalized, nor will I ever penalize someone because they don't have the resource or the wherewithal or the ability to appear virtually. But it is an avenue that we want to open up as wide as possible to relieve a lot of the pressure on our dockets and the folks that are waiting who do have the ability to do that. And our defense attorneys are doing a great job of working with those folks and finding those folks that do have the ability to appear virtually. It's a question that I ask when I'm in court with folks. They're appearing personally with an attorney. We have begun asking, can you do this virtually? And it's very important that we do because the answer isn't always yes. Sometimes folks have a learning disability. They don't really operate on a remote basis very well. Sometimes people don't have a smartphone or the ability to have access to a computer or to Wi-Fi. And for those folks, you have to make sure that you keep that denominator open always. And so short answer, no one's going to be penalized for not being able to appear virtually, but we're going to open up as much as possible to take care of those folks that can.
Thank you. I think that's really critical. It becomes an equity issue.
Always.
My second comment is, I understand that we have to wait a long time for people to come to court. However, I know someone who a month, maybe 6 weeks tops, was cited for smoking marijuana downtown. And he saw a judge yesterday. That was pretty quick, and received a $200 fine. This person is mostly homeless and doesn't have a job. And yet if he had been smoking meth or using heroin, he would have had a $100 fine. But my real question is, why are minor offenses like that getting before a judge in a month?
Well, Councilor Semple, again, great questions. Gosh, you guys get down to the bone really quick, and I appreciate it. And my fast answer to that is the court is a neutral body. And as long as the city is prosecuting a violation of an ordinance violation or a crime, whether it's a violation of the Oregon Revised Statutes as incorporated by the city code or the city code itself, as long as those people are being cited, I have to, and my mission is ultimately to make sure that there is a neutral place for those matters to be heard. It is not for me to just out and dismiss because of the equities. It has to do with making sure that what the intent of the council here is, what the intent of the city code is, and then making sure all the constitutional rights of every defendant are all being met. I cannot introduce my arbitrary judicial activism about what I think ought to happen or what not ought to happen. If the city code says that a fine will be X and I can reduce it down to Y, and I see a situation that you've described it, I'm going to reduce it probably down to Y. I'm also going to tell that person that we have the ability to work with that person to pay the fine, that they can sign up for community service, which is still active, and they can potentially do some other activity like road crew to work off the fine. When we were active with the community court and we had resource providers, then a lot of the times the judges would say, look, if you go down to the community court and you make contact with someone in housing or some other resource, and you have this piece of paper signed, then we're going to keep that fine suspended. So it's not that the court wants to impose fines here. And in fact, during the pandemic, the initial months of that, the court was not requiring people to make payments. It was forgiving late payments, driver's license suspensions, all the things that folks who were facing financial crises would find making it even worse.
I appreciate that. And this person was given the option to pay it off $40 a month, which she doesn't have. But my real concern is, why was that minor citation given a judge's time when we have people waiting until March for trials?
Well, if I could prioritize every single violation that came in, that would be a really awesome effort. And I can double check to make sure that isn't something that we can't do. But if it's a violation, they're probably going to be stacked and heard in the order that they're received by the court and on the cite date that the officer has given to the person. And it's not like a crime where if it's something that needs to be adjudicated quickly because of a victim's rights issue or the availability of a witness issue or evidence becoming stale or something like that. If it's not something like that, then it's just going to have to be in line. We have our violation dockets very separate from our criminal dockets. We're still exercising, trying to figure out how to best prioritize our virtual dockets, but those are accessible to everybody. So this person would have been able to access a virtual docket and to get, as soon as possible on there, the same way a defense attorney would be able to have someone charged with a crime on a virtual docket as soon as the next virtual docket was available. And that's just really the split in the court and the kind of business that comes through. Councilor Semple, there's a stat that I'm gonna pull up really quick because this was something that was told to me back in June, I believe. And that was, where did I put it? Here it is. So just as an example of the kind of work that the court has to do, this is the violations for people smoking marijuana in public, which I will tell you is a $1,000 presumptive fine that the court imposes no more than $250 on. That was a decision that we made and reduces down from there. So it's nowhere close to the maximum fine that was decided and passed on by, I think, this council. But in the first 13 weeks after we closed our doors, and at the very beginning of this thing, the first 13 weeks, so that's a little over 2 months, we were still open to the public, and our court staff answered approximately 4,250 phone calls from the public and responded to, not just read, but responded to over 3,250 emails from the public. Okay, that is when we're closed. That is when people are concerned about their cases and we're responding to the demands of the public. Now that we're open, We do the very best we can with the limited court staff that we have that are super, as I said, super stressed and as anxious as anybody else in the public here. And so the person who's appearing on the violation was set to appear, and that was put in motion, and the court caught it as it came in, as it is a passive entity, right? Not charging people with crimes, not telling them what they need to do, but simply receiving the cite, receiving the filing, and being here so their case can be heard.
Thank you.
Ma'am, thank you very much. And it's a wonderful question, and it's rife with all kinds of conversations that are interwoven with it. That's the practical answer up front.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Alan, I'm going to let you have your turn because you waited, but let's try and wrap it up because we do have another piece of important business to discuss today.
Yeah, actually, I have one question. I keep getting dropped off and on and rebooted. So if I drop off, we get new things every day in 2020.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Judge Gill, for all the work that you're doing and all your staff of keeping the court afloat and all this really, really difficult time. I think you've done a really good job. Well done. Mike asked most of my questions. It actually makes me feel better about all the crap that I have to go through listening to all the stuff that you guys have overcome. So thank you for that. It helped me with my day.
I appreciate it.
I also appreciate what Claire said, which is that the virtual court after the pandemic is something that we still have access to, because I agree, all those people that have access issues to the court, this would help greatly. And we're seeing that at the council and other venues as well. I guess my question is more of a much higher level and almost a yes/no question, because people have asked me this actually directly or indirectly, and is justice still being served during the pandemic?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I needed to know. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you for the question.
That is the perfect, oh, okay, Betty. All right, Betty, I'll let you go. Go for it. One more.
Thank you. I just want to say that I'm glad Emily brought up the marijuana thing. I don't, if it's a police matter, it's something we should discuss with the police, but it really disturbed me that people for smoking marijuana are arrested, fined, whatever, when people who are doing things to other people get by. And I'm not asking you to comment on that right now, but I just want to say, if you do have anything to do with it, I think it's really disturbing. Thank you.
I appreciate that, ma'am. Thank you very much.
All right, clearly, Judge, we could continue this conversation for hours, and very, very much appreciate your work and your leadership and your whole team and the way you've navigated. And thank you for giving us your time today. And we'll have to do this more often because we're clearly very interested in the ongoing work. So we'll try and get you back on our schedule sooner than later.
Yes, ma'am. Al, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And feel free, everybody, I've said it before, I'll be a broken record. Reach out, questions, let me know.
Great. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
With that, we are now adjourning this work session, and the City Council will reconvene to meet in executive session pursuant to ORS 192.6602E to deliberate with persons designated to negotiate real property transactions. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. And with that, you are all to close out of this Zoom and re-enter into the next Zoom meeting that you should have, for which you should have a link.